Karen with Runner's Edge. I am so excited to bring you another session online, talking about a really special topic for me. I've struggled with this when I was a player and even as a referee, and what we're going to talk about is mental skills, mental toughness, everything you can. There's lots of different ways you can talk about it, but I think that piece of the puzzle for high school players, for college players transitioning to college, it's a really big piece of the puzzle that often we don't talk about. So I'm really excited to bring on Katie Wurst, who's a friend of mine. We are both World Rugby educators and trainers as well, so we do talk quite a bit, and it's a lot of fun. But I brought her on specifically because she does have a really strong background in sports psychology, and she's also the head coach at Queen's University Charlotte, and she's got a ton of background with rugby in general, and I'll let her explain a little bit more about her background, and then we're just going to dive in. So I know most people don't have a ton of time. We want to hit you with a ton of stuff, and then we'll certainly post a bunch of resources for you as well. So Katie, welcome. I'm so excited you're here.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Karen. It's always just incredible to talk to you. You're just such a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic, which is something I'm very passionate about, something that I believe they go hand in hand with sport coaching. So sports psychology, sport coaching, how much of it can help. It's been very prominent in the Olympics every year. There's just more knowledge and information. And there really is kind of this moment of understanding how wellness and taking care of ourselves is very important. And the mental side of our performance is so critical. So I want to talk a little bit about my background. So I am actually an applied sports psychology practitioner. So I am certified with the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. There's kind of two worlds of the applied and the more clinical side. So a clinical psychologist could come from different backgrounds, and there's oftentimes that applied practitioners will refer to clinical psychologists. So we think about how we kind of work in both of those worlds. So that's my background. I got my degrees from University of Wisconsin La Crosse, University of Minnesota, as well as the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and got actually a doctorate of education and focus on seeing how the applied side of the work is getting this knowledge kind of off the bookshelves and out into the hands of coaches and parents and athletes and everybody else, and practitioners just like yourself. So I love the idea of blending what you do with helping people transition to college, because so much of the mental game is transitions. Yeah. So I thought I would just kind of start with, like, Karen, how much of, so say like percentage wise out of 100%, how much of the sport of rugby would you say is mental?
I mean, I know my guess is going to be low. I mean, my guess is at least over 50%, like half is mental and half is physical.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of people sometimes are like, oh man, it's the most mental sport. Like, it's the most grueling, taxing, and you have to make decisions. And so any range, but I've never heard any person say anything less than 50%, right? And I love that you brought up the physical side of the game. So when we think about the percentage, at least 50% mental, physical, how much of your time when you were training as a serious athlete and a serious referee, how much of your time training did you spend training physically?
Like 90%.
Probably. Right. So when we think about that, if so much of our game is mental, but all that we do is oftentimes this physical training. So how do we create kind of this balance of both? And oftentimes people just say, well, I know how to physically train. I get in the gym, right? I go and I do strength and conditioning. I get my body prepared. Well, we can also work on getting our minds prepared as well, too. So if you're at 10 to 0% of ever training mentally, yet the game is at least over 50%, right there is a really simple way that we can kind of close the gap to improve our performance overall. Or beyond just performance, it's also safety and just enjoying the sport, right? And any play or any performance environment. So I really like that it's kind of shifting away from like tough everything out to now being aware of our safety, our wellness. So I think there is such a degree of toughness within our sport, but there's also around like, how do we condition ourselves mentally? So, and oftentimes it is shifting to this idea of physical conditioning and also mental conditioning. So sometimes we even use this terminology of being a mental, somebody who works in the mind gym or mental conditioning exercise.
Right.
And I know we wanted to talk about a couple of different like topic areas, but a good thing to think about is just like what sports psychology is as a field. Mm-hmm. And it's really thinking about like the study of how psychological factors can influence sport, athletic performance, exercise, and physical activity. So
that's a lot.
right, so it's really not just like the most elite, high performing athletes or individuals. And it's sort of like, how can we express mental conditioning throughout our lifetimes? And that will then increase enjoyment for performance and outcomes, like loving it and having fun doing what we're doing. So then you'll be able to play and participate for a lifetime, which then impacts a whole bunch of different physiological and psychological factors. Okay. So some of the things that come up a lot with college students, like if you were to just kind of say, hey, these are a few things, or even with people that you've worked with that might be in the realm of some mental conditioning areas that you've seen might be a challenge, or some things that have come up.
I mean, I think maybe I don't know if I'm off topic, but maybe the idea of the pressure of being good enough, making the team, but then like not starting, or, you're not as, I don't know, feeling intimidated by just like it's a big jump from high school playing to college playing. So that piece, being under pressure of, I don't want to say carrying a university on your back, but there are certainly like those, it's a different pressure, right? I know we've talked about pressure before, but just the idea of having it mean more in a way, or like now you've got coaches, athletic trainers, and more teammates, or maybe you have scholarship on the line. So it feels like a lot more, along with being a successful student, right? So like that's all paired together. That would, I think, add on to the weight that maybe a student athlete is carrying.
Right, definitely. So I heard pressure was a big one. Also around just anxieties that are being produced by expectation. Definitely those expectations, or there's also motivation. So I heard you mention things like a scholarship. That's a really big extrinsic motivator, which is an external force, right? Something that says, I do A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z is the outcome for me. So just a few more. So performance anxiety, a big one is fear of failure. So the idea of like, hey, I've been given all these opportunities. What if they don't work out? Motivation, consistency. A big one for me is just finding balance and management of expectations, and then athletic identity comes a lot into that. So much of us as players and athletes and coaches is who we are, is a big part of our identity. So when something like, say, an injury in a full contact sport comes up, it literally feels like grief or loss. So a piece of our identity is, hopefully what we're able to do is find some really great adaptive coping mechanisms so that we can alter that identity and then have it expand into a place that we have really come into, like for your own self, like finding refereeing after you've played, or getting this opportunity to help young people go to college when maybe that was something we didn't have when we just started playing. So you've actually done a phenomenal job, Karen, of figuring out a way to do that. So I want to talk about just like a couple of different strategies or things that, this is really surface level, but just some different pieces that might be really helpful.
Great.
Because they helped me as an athlete and helped myself as a practitioner and as a coach each day, talking one-on-one with athletes. But a big one a lot of people have heard is the idea of controlling the controllables. So the things that you can control in certain settings versus the things that you don't have control over. So, and different, personalities come into that, different levels of feeling like you need to have control. And I feel like a transition to college is a big area where with transition comes change. With change comes things that are not immediately at your ability to go your way or the way that you perceive you want them to go. Really simple exercise to do is literally to sit down and think about and write down or draw the things that you feel like you can control of a situation versus the things that you don't have control over. So what would be like, you're in a rugby match and you're playing, what's something that you don't have control over?
I mean, the easiest one I think is like weather, right? So if it's raining, if it's super windy, something like that, really, I don't know, like the fields are weird, like lined, or, I mean, we've all been there. We've been
even, all of a sudden you're coming from the West Coast to a college on the East Coast. There's a huge time zone difference. Any of those things can have an impact on all of it. Or one of my favorites that's really common is very, close to your heart, Karen, is the referee, right? So we don't necessarily control the referee and what they do on the field. We don't control our opponents. We don't control even our coaches and our selection. We can't control the fans in the stands. There's so many of these things. But, you know, what can you control? Say a referee makes a call. It's not the call that you would have liked to have happen. Maybe you don't agree with it, but what do you have control over in that situation? Say you don't agree with what the referee's calls made. What can you control?
So if I was a player, I think at that point, it's going to be, you know, regrouping and how do we get out of this territory? How do we create a turnover? How, you know, like it's very cheesy, kind of like, okay, we go forward, right? Like, what's like the next step? What are we doing now?
Right. Absolutely. So in a short version is you can control your reaction to the situation, right? You can control your attitude. You can control the effort you put in. You can control how you plan from there out. So this is like just a short list of the things you can control, even in uncontrollable situations.
So would you, so would you recommend, so let's say there's a student out there who struggles with this, right? Where they really get really bogged down with when things don't go their way, right? Like, and to be honest, when I was a player, I was this way. When things are going well, I would continue to play well. But if things started going bad, it would almost like continue to go bad because I wouldn't be able to move on, right? I wouldn't be able to react. I would go back to, I missed that tackle. I did X, Y, or Z. So, I mean, if we could jump back in time, just something that came to my mind when you were talking, it's like, I would almost want to sit down and say, the next time the next time I miss a tackle, I will do blank, blank, and blank. Like come almost brainstorm things I would then do.
And
or something.
You're talking about is like the ability to learn from the situation, you know? So instead of kind of associating a lot of, hey, this is the situation the way it was, and it's created a catastrophic situation, it's now, look at me, I have the chance to learn from it. So what you're talking about is sort of game planning for when the scenario comes up, here I am able to learn. So some of those pieces with there would be like your self-talk or how you then strategize and how you then interact with your teammates around it. So going back to kind of the control the controllables idea is like the one thing that you can have no matter what, even if you can't control a situation, is you can have influence. So you have one way to go, which I always talk to athletes, especially team leaders, around you don't like the call that the referee made. And the influence you can have is yelling at them, right? Making some comments back. What type of influence do you think, and Karen, you know this personally, what type of influence are you going to have on that match official at that point, right? Now you've got to play the rest of the game with this negative influence because you didn't control what you could control, which is your reaction. So you can think about that reaction. So if it goes in that direction, you've now had the influence head in a direction that's going to make it more difficult or more challenging for you. Versus another, you know, suggestion might be simply to find a way in an appropriate time span to seek learning. So to ask, hey, this didn't, you know, go this way. Can you help me find out how we can do it next? I wouldn't recommend doing that in the exact moment that happened, but that's about using good communication skills and timing and social cues to figure out when can you use it as a chance to learn.
Right.
And if you think about this scenario, it's kind of the same as having a new roommate and having a discussion on, you know, the temperature in the room, or if you know, stay up late at night versus getting up early in the morning. How do you find the right, like, social cues, communication moments to find good balance to be able to navigate the things that are uncontrollable? Because you definitely can't control your roommate either, but that's a big part of college. But what you can control is the way you interact, the way you communicate, the way you talk to them, the way you show respect, etc. The same things you would do to a referee, a teammate, a coach, anyone. So control the controllables is a really big piece of it. And sometimes just sitting down and thinking about it and writing it down. Because if you think it, you should ink it, right? Like give yourself some time to really notice. So for you, you're saying, oh, it was really hard for me to get through this. If something like missing a tackle is a situation you know that's challenging, that's where you can sit down and write through that and say, well, what do I control about this situation?
Yeah.
And what don't I control?
Yeah.
And if I can't control something, what's the influence I can have?
Right.
And then what are my strategies to make that influence kind of shift in your favor? So that's one that's really good. Another one kind of is really that idea of focusing on the process and setting sort of tangible goals. So if you're thinking about like statistical analysis and other things, and I missed this many tackles, right? So that's a number and that's an extrinsic value. And there's another side of it where maybe it's not that you did anything technically wrong, your opponent just did something exceptional. You know, I think oftentimes that's sort of like really makes people stop and think that how was my technique? What was I doing? But the whole point of sport is to have these incredible like oppositional moments. And that's a good thing. It would be really boring if it was perfect all the time. Okay. Every score would be 0-0. So the idea is really about like, how are we thinking about our process to being able to do a finite skill like making a tackle, you know? So going back and instead of saying, I missed this, and that's the end of that conversation for yourself, or even the rest of your team, it's more, how is my technique? What can I do there? What is the process to get to the goal that I'm looking for? So I think goal setting in general is great. So that can really apply to classroom environments as well too. So instead of feeling like it's completely overwhelming what you need to do, sitting down and setting those incremental short-term plus some more long-term goals can kind of give you more back to that sense of control, can make you like, well, you know what I have control over? I have the ability to set some reasonable and measurable goals that are going to help myself. So you often use the acronym SMART. So specific, measurable, you know, there's accountability in there, realistic and time-based. So all of those pieces will help you. And sort of like in classroom settings or even in rugby field settings, there's a time-based is by the end of the match, right? Or I need to be on time for practice, or how am I making sure I turn in my assignment? So sometimes even just organizational skills to be aware of what those time components are. So what is your routine, right? So what type of routine do you have to make sure you feel organized enough to know and have the pieces to be able to set the goals for yourself?
Yeah. I think one of the things as you're talking, it makes me think about like, I think one of the things a lot of students that I talk to might bring up is they'll say, you know, like I'm really good at, let's say I don't know, I'm really good at my running and my passing skills, but when coaches have seen me, they've commented my defense is not great, right? Or like scrumming needs work or something like that. And then it's almost like mentally they're like, I'm just not good at that. And how to shift it from you're just not good at that yet, or how to then they'll be like, oh, I'll just keep working on the stuff I'm good at, you know? And then you're like, well, yeah, you're really great. I can see when you get an open field, you're awesome, right? But let's go back to the fact that the feedback you've been getting is, you know, if there's a score like out of 5, which I've seen some coaches, you know, at camps and stuff will give them kind of a rating, you know, where like 5 is, let's say, exceptional, tackling is like a 3. And they'll say like really good things where they're like, you need to work on body position or, you know, things like that. And then instead of like motivating them, they end up feeling like, well, I'm just bad at tackling. So that's kind of, or maybe I shouldn't play in college now. And you're like, why does your mind go there? I don't know if it's just like like not wanting to hear something bad, if that makes sense. I don't know.
I think one of the toughest things anybody can generate is feedback, especially when it's not the feedback that you love. Or even more challenging is when, you know, just to use that rating system, if you think you're a 5 and all of a sudden you hear you're a 2 from someone that you respect and know. But I think there's a way also that there's a piece of how coaches can deliver that feedback. And I also think for athletes, it's the openness to hearing and understanding. And some of that is built on like a trust-based relationship and everything else that you're there to help and provide support, which can be challenging to do over the course of a few days at a camp. So, but I also think the idea is really to consider it as like a filter. So people who have a great filter for their feedback seek the learning opportunity. And I love that way of thinking because it's like, even if you get the most challenging feedback you've ever got, you always have the choice to learn from it, right? So your ability to choose to learn and choose to be open to it and choose to see it as, I love that you said the not yet portion of it, to kind of have that growth mindset of that perspective of saying, you know, what can I pull out from this feedback that's going to be very helpful to me? Because again, a coach giving you feedback is not something you have control over. You might completely disagree with it, but you can, again, have the influence and have the ability to process it. So sometimes, like you said, hey, you're awesome at open field play. What does awesome look like? What exactly is it? Can I see it in a video, right? Can I point it out that's certain technique? You know, are there other different things that are going on, right? Or sometimes it's like, great, I'm the fastest on the field, but you know, how many turnovers am I creating because my decision-making isn't quite there? So, and as you progress through different levels of competition, that can be really challenging, right? So you go from high school to college, all of a sudden there's a shift in the level of experience, playing ability. You're now the youngest versus the oldest, but you were in high school. So some of that is realistic expectations as well, and understanding that it truly is a journey. So go right back to that process focus, right? So your process orientation is going to be helpful in saying, at the end of the day, I'm just not good at this. I'm not going to play in college. Everybody has the opportunity to do so. It's really just the effort you want to put in, the openness to learning, and the willingness to get excited about ways to improve your game, or because everybody's improving constantly every day. Coaches want to learn all the time. I'm sure you learn every day in your job. And so instead of taking that as like I'm a failure because I'm not where I need to be, it's really sort of having that goal setting process align with saying I have plenty of room to grow, and the growth is the most key part of it. So, and it's just like anything else, you have to practice. So this is back to the part about practicing your mental skills. So if most people say, oh, I only practice about 10% of the mental game, then of course, when people get harder feedback, it's hard for them to understand how to apply some of these skills.
So can I, and I might be jumping ahead, let's say this is a high school player, high school family watching this. They're like, all right, Katie, this sounds awesome. But so now what? Now we know that I need to practice. What are some, some simple ways, or some, if they've never done it, right? They're in that 90-10 split where they're like, I don't know, we watch film, or we might talk as a team about our performance. That's kind of the extent of the thinking through or reflecting. What are some things they can do on their own, or right now, maybe they're in an off season, so they're heading into a fall season. Are there a couple of things you already have in mind that you want to share about how they could start thinking about those things?
Well, something that's simple is think about a routine that you would have for any performance environment for training, right? You're going to practice, and a lot of people just kind of come to practice and show up. But is there a routine that you have, right? So maybe it does take, I'm going to come to training 15 minutes early because I know I want to work on my scrummaging, my body position. So I'm now going to grab a teammate and decide to come early, and that's going to be our routine. And I'm going to make sure that I'm having conversation with the coach so that they're aware of kind of my plan, and then ask them, what are the things you would like for me to do in this time span? Okay. And not everybody has that amount of time, especially in college. But it doesn't mean that you can't find different ways to kind of learn on your own that will supplement what coaches are looking for too. So really developing your performance routine. And again, back to setting a goal. Have you sat down and said, I want to get better at this? The part about the fear of failure element, or the, well, I guess I'm just not so very good at this, that's really practicing your own self-talk, or practicing acknowledging. What I would say is something like recognize and reflect. So coming back to I recognize that this thought isn't productive or positive for me. And it doesn't mean you have to be sunshine and rainbows all the time. Not everything is positive, but that might not be productive for you. So, and you can do simple things like literally practice visualizing a stop sign or something else that can help you to just say, look, this isn't maybe heading me in the direction that I want to be on, right? Let's get off that one way, train trip to negative town and sort of stop for a minute and say, what am I doing right now that's helping me reach my goal? And acknowledging that listening to the feedback from your coaches is part of the process. So getting used to practicing what that might be. It also can be things like working with teammates to say, hey, this is what I'm going through, and talking through it with some of them. There also are really phenomenal counselors and other services on different campuses that might be really helpful to reach out to and find out, because you are going through change and transition. So I think any of those things are looking for the resources that you have at your disposal.
Yeah.
But self-talk is a big one. Thinking about what you can control. Another one is just practice breathing. We often, when we are hey, I'm just not great at this, just sort of clamp up, forget to breathe, and put ourselves into a place that instead, always using breath as a moment to pause. And if you pause for a second, another really favorite one of mine is, it's virtually impossible to think about being grateful for something and being anxious at the same time. Okay. If you're expressing gratitude, so say you get that feedback from the coach and you can say, hey, coach, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about it. Then you'll feel less anxious around what it actually is, because the brain works in two different ways. And if you think about it, times that you felt really, really anxious about something, you've been really far away from the way that gratitude might be expressed. Try to use that as a way to kind of help shift your thinking in a different direction.
Yeah. I was just going to,
it's different. There's no one way, special method for each human. That's why I say it's really just learning, finding a good fit for yourself. There's great practitioners out there. So
yeah, I was just going to, every time I talk, you're always like, whenever I talk to Katie, I feel like it like digs up like, oh, that makes me think of this, or I make different connections and things like that. Back when I was refereeing and I was really trying to do this, people don't know this, but with referees, there's a whole other like ladder, and there's these things you're trying to climb and try to do bigger matches and things. And one of the things, like if I would get anxious, right, like you're doing a bigger game, or there's more pressures on you as a person in the middle. I did work with a sports psychologist, and one of the things, absolutely what Katie just mentioned, the breathing part is really hard because you're not getting enough oxygen in your brain. So you're just like in panic mode, or your fight, flight, freeze kind of mentality. So something that I would do, those are like in those moments, right? Like either, before a kickoff, when there's a try and you have those little moments of time to yourself, I don't know, whatever, I'm starting to kind of panic a little bit in my head about like things that are going well or going wrong, would be to sing, even if it's quietly, because as long as you're breathing, right? So I don't know. Thank God I wasn't mic'd for some of these, because you're literally going, okay, and it can be simple, right? So if you're a player and something's happened, you can kind of sing the ABCs to yourself, twinkle, twinkle, little star. You can sing little things. So it just gets you breathing again. So you're like, okay, we're back in my body. We're on this field, and you're kind of just being more clear about, instead of just going down the road of, I messed up. This is, oh, they should just take me off, whatever, like wherever your mind goes. The singing piece was an interesting like thing of like, okay, if I can do anything, like I'm going to do this part to get me back. It won't fix everything, but at least I've given myself a chance to rethink about this decision, right? Or what do I need to do next? It just gave me that little moment. And the second thing, what you touched on, which I thought was really interesting, is the idea of practicing some positive self-talk. I think it is really easy for all of us to get into it's super easy to be like, oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that. Or I'm a dummy, or I'm whatever. So to practice, so my family makes fun of me all the time because there's a cartoon my daughter watches, and it's called Super Wings. And it's about a plane that delivers stuff, right? And his motto is on time, every time. So they always joke about how if there's like a kid's birthday party, I'm like there before the people who are hosting it, because they're like, Karen Fong, on time, every time, like that. So that's something I do really well. Okay. Like I am on time. And to be able to say to myself, like, that's good. I know that sounds really dumb, but for me, like to practice saying like, I'm good at that, right? Like I'm good at being somewhere on time. I'm good at directions. I'm good at lining the field. I mean, it can be anything, but practicing giving yourself the praise is good, because I think definitely when you're on a rugby field, sometimes there isn't anyone to tell you that, right? There isn't a coach saying, hey, good job. Like that was really good footwork. Or so for yourself to be able to say, I missed that tackle, but I chased that person down 60 meters, right? Like that, I'm proud of myself for that moment, because someone might not say it to you. And I think that's hard when we're always looking for external feedback to give yourself feedback. So I love what you were saying about like reflecting and practicing, which I don't think we do enough of, is practicing that piece.
Right. And I also just love like the idea that you turned a situation that could be, again, back to that, what you have control over, and you have control over your effort, right? You missed the tackle and you can still chase it down. And there's so many wonderful examples, especially with the Olympics on now, of things not going their way and then just persisting, right? And really, and that takes time, right? To get through experience, and with experiences like trusting your process. So the idea that, hey, this might not go this way, but I know that I have the faith in myself to say that I've practiced these skills and I can recover, right? And I can different place, or, hey, I missed a tackle. It's an opportunity for a teammate of mine to do something exceptional, and we team, and we are part of this team sport. So I think that we've seen some great examples of that recently, and being able to say, like, my last one is the idea that, like, just remembering or reminding yourself that, you know, rugby is what you do. It's not who you are, you know, so that athletic identity sometimes can be in a place where it says, like, everything that I am is tied into whether this tackle is successful or not. And at the end of the day, like, your family, your pets, your teammates are still going to think, you know, they're very, like, privileged to have you in their lives. And just
I love that.
That is a great thing, because it does really impact, like, some of the chemical reactions to pressure and things like that. So, you know, it's like everything can be related to pressure. And I think with pressure, sometimes it can be very helpful for other people, and different people have different ways to manage it. But it is ultimately just understanding that there's opportunity or enjoyment that goes with the sport. So as myself as a coach, I, you know, constantly think about pressures of, you know, have I signed this athlete, or have we, you know, set up this schedule this way? And at the end of the day, I just go back to, what's the experience that we're all having? You know, are we loving and enjoying the sport, enjoying being around one another? Are we creating a culture and an environment that allows people to thrive and puts people in a situation to where they really love feeling like, you know, there's pressure involved with it, because we have practiced and we've worked on our skills, and we know that there's things we can't control, but we can always have influence. Right. Or go back to, you know, we're clear on what it is that we want to achieve and how we go about doing it. And if there is some lack of clarity, how do we communicate to one another to figure out how to do it together? Yeah. And you don't ever have to be the one person on the island trying to make things all better. And that goes back to really awesome resources you have on college campuses or anywhere, to just know that it is 100% the best thing you can do to find where those resources are, ask people for help, and then sort of pass that along and share it to others too. Yeah. And seeing that happen, it's been really wonderful. Whether that's through counseling, student accessibility services, there's so many different pieces of it that I'm really thrilled that people are becoming much more open to the ideas that these are things that going to college is all about. Like, they have these resources for you in place, and you should 100% look into them or help others, because when you do, it might help another teammate or a coach or anybody in the environment to feel that they can too. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're all, we have to just do this again, because I always feel like, once we get on some stuff, we can just like keep going, and I love it. But I definitely think we're running a little bit short on time. So I just want to thank you so much for your time today to even share your expertise. I think, you know, hopefully the families that are watching this, even if they take a couple nuggets away of some things they can apply, you know, and think through. The thing I want to just bring it back to, what I love about what you're saying is, yes, we're talking about kind of those, practicing those mental skills and things that will hopefully, you know, add to their, you know, a student's performance on a field. But generally speaking, it all crosses over, right? Like how you perform well, maybe under pressure on a field, also translates to how they perform in a really big standardized test, or on a big final, or how they deal with, you know, like a tough thing they're dealing with a friend or with their family, you know. So it's kind of, it always all ties together. You know, it's not like sports psychology is like only for sport. It's like how you deal with those. That's why we love sports, right? Like, I think it creates these moments that allow you to practice things kind of not in real life, but then it translates, and you can do it again, like kind of in your work world or in your family life, all those sorts of things. So that's why that's obviously why we've stayed with it for so long. So anyway, thank you so much. We're definitely going to do another session. I hope to see you again. And then obviously send me any resources. I'll make sure to post it along with this session. And then hopefully I will see you out on the pitch sometime soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Karen. I really like talking to you as always.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.